All right. Good morning, class.
Good morning, sir.
Last class. Yay! Last class. No? You guys want to stay in PHP forever? No?
So there's no class on Monday?
We have class? No, there's no class on Monday. Monday is, next week is exam week.
Sure. Oh,
So,
yeah.
yeah. No, there'll be no class on Monday. I will be very, very busy grading all of the assignments that are coming in before my exams start, and some of your exams start. At least one of your exams is also one of my exams. There we go. So, final assignment, how's it going?
Basically done.
Basically done?
I just need to
Good.
comment everything.
That's good.
Just talking about logging was basically impossible because of the starter code.
Yeah, question 2 was, it was, let's just say the blueprint for the course was left in a state that needed a repair in order to actually execute the assignment. So, if you didn't see the announcements, I just ended up letting go of question 2. Question 1 is the only question on the assignment, so that will significantly cut down on the amount of, time and effort required to complete the assignment. So please use that time to study for your exams, this one and any other ones that you might have. So, aside from that, yes.
What date is the actual final exam taking place on?
That's an excellent question. I think this one is
It's well.
Tuesday, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
How
long is it?
3 hours.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Let's see here. Course evaluation survey. Oh, well, 10% response rate so far. So far, not too bad, not too bad. Please make sure to get your course evaluations in. Although, given that the course evaluations close on the 20th, it seems that you'll have an opportunity to rate the course after you've written the exam. So I imagine probably some people, like, what's even the point of me trying to get you to fill out the survey if you can fill the survey out after the exam? Obviously that's what you would do, right? Oh boy. But anyway. So I just wanted to bring to your attention some of the practice material that's been posted, because, it's entirely probable that practice material will be helpful. So, as soon as the projector figures itself out. Aside from taking a look at what review materials are available, my idea of what this course would be, my idea of today's class is big fat course review, where, I put all the topics up on the board and address them briefly. People seem to like it when we do that. So, we go. So, if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you've got final exam. I've dug out pretty much all of the stuff that I had in my archive with respect to practice material. And essentially, most of these documents are kind of short. A lot of them are only 3 questions long. These ones, I believe, are 3 questions each. A couple of questions, for some reason, written in shouty case. There it is. This one is a bit more beefy. I would consider this one to have questions more similar to exam questions. The first 3 are kind of like topic review questions, if that makes sense. They're not necessarily representative of what would be on the exam. In addition, I have the actual final exam from the fall 2023 offering of this course, which is, probably the best one in this list in terms of like length, depth, coverage, etc., as that is an actual honest to goodness final exam that was run previously. And practice exam, there we go. Essentially, 2 questions, but I was kind of like, these are questions that were kind of cast off the current version of the exam. These were questions that I ended up rejecting for one reason or another, but you guys might as well have them for practice, right? So, yeah, if I had a bit more time, I would have taken all the rest of these questions and harmonized them into this document, but I didn't have time. Yes?
Just as a side, one of the questions, you took the URL and then you can like read it and put it in a file. So I guess you could just like skim the website. What's the practical use of that?
This guy here? Or
I think it's like the second portfolio of the sets of 3.
this one?
Yeah, I think read the URL. Yeah, number 2. Read the URL and then put it in a file. And when I did that, it like scanned the website and put its HTML into the file. So what's like the practical use of like skimming a web page like that?
Oh, well, it depends on how selective you want to be, right? This is a practice called web scraping, right? You probably have heard of web scraping before. Although you may have heard it in the context of something like scraping videos off of YouTube, right? So, like, for example, maybe there's a YouTube video and you'd like to have it as an actual video file on your actual computer. There are utilities you can use, to scrape that video off of YouTube, save it as a local file. Why you would do this for HTML, or just kind of website content in general, to my mind, you'd have to be doing something like programmatic with the output. There's no real advantage to doing this versus looking the website up in a browser if it's only you, if you want to view a web page, right? This is not the way you do it. However, if you wanted to, train a large language model on the contents of web pages, you could write a script that would scrape web pages off the internet, feed that HTML output into your large language model and, voila, ChatGPT is born, right? So that's like one application. There are a bunch of applications for it. This is also essentially the process by which, historically speaking, Google's search engine used an algorithm called PageRank to prioritize its hits, right? Has anybody heard of the PageRank algorithm? It's fairly simple, PageRank. All that PageRank is Google goes out onto the internet and has bots that scan web pages and see how many web pages on the internet link to you, right? The idea was, like, back in those days, no one's going to put up a web page just to put a bunch of links on it to promote content on Google, right? That'd just be crazy. Who would go to the effort? You got to pay for that, man, right? So, like, Google's PageRank algorithm kind of comes from an era before the commercialization of the internet, but that would be the process by which they would count how many people are linking to you. Does that make sense? So yeah, it's quite important actually. Just, for your average user, there's really no reason to do it, right? Yeah. Any other questions? That's a good question. Yeah.
I'm a little more interested in what you described as page scraping. What else can you tell us about it?
Page scraping?
Yeah.
Well, there's stuff you can scrape and stuff you can't, right? Obviously, you can't scrape PHP scripts, right? Because, the PHP is executed out of them. I don't know if I can give you more depth on it than I already have. You're kind of doing a primitive form of it anytime you, right-click, download image, But yeah, it's PHP is a thing you can use. You can access web pages off the internet with PHP, but did you know you can also do it with Python?
Nope.
Yeah. So, you can do it with any programming language actually. Pretty much any general purpose programming language will be capable of sending HTTP requests. But, people often use Python for this sort of thing. Python is a very popular language.
Sounds like Python isn't so bad after all.
Well, just because it's popular doesn't mean that it's right, right? TikTok is popular. Doesn't mean that it's good or right, So I would direct your attention to URL-lib, which is a library in Python for handling URL requests. URL-lib.request for opening and reading URLs. If you wanted to scrape the data off of the internet, and work with it kind of in the way that you would do like a Java program, or I mean like a standalone application, right? Not like something web embedded. This is how you do it in Python. You can scrape a bunch of websites. You can pick through the strings, do regular expressions on them, all kinds of stuff, right? Find whatever information you want to find, right? A thing you could do is you could fairly easily do a reachability analysis, right? So if a website links to other websites, you basically take those links and you put them in a stack, and you can do something like depth first search or breadth first search over internet links to find if two sites are linked to each other. and by how many intermediate sites, right? You can do stuff like that. Essentially, at that point, you're starting to model the internet as a graph, like, no, like graph theory, that kind of graph. Yeah, this kind of stuff, right? You can kind of model, the internet as a series of connected nodes, right? And these are the types of data structures that you can do things like, tree searching over to find interesting properties. So, you can do interesting stuff with it, but web scraping, it's kind of like, web scraping is kind of reading information off the internet into anything but a browser. Does that make sense?
It does.
Is that a satisfactory explanation?
It is. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. All right. Cool. So, any objections to launching into our big fat review then? All right. That would kind of be an interesting assignment, wouldn't it?
A web stripper?
Yeah,
I think it'd be cool.
yeah. But like the reachability analysis thing itself, because you should be able to regex out a URL from an HTML page pretty easily, Ugh. For example, did you know that on Wikipedia, right, if you continually click the first link
Yeah,
on
any Wikipedia webpage?
on any Wikipedia page, if you continually click the first link in every article, you'll eventually arrive at philosophy, right? Interesting little, but something you could even restrict it to the domain of Wikipedia, and it would still be very interesting. But anyway, so discourse, server side, topics. Anybody care to propose a topic? What did we cover this semester? MVC? Definitely. What else?
SQL, database communications?
Sure. SQL/database and sessions. I think
Sessions and cookies.
you say. Yeah. What else do we have?
REST API.
Sorry?
REST API stuff.
REST API. I'm going to throw that in with MVC
Okay.
because they're kind of highly related. But yes, REST API stuff. What else do we have? Those are definitely 3 major topics from the second half of the course. Cookies, sure. I'll throw that in with sessions. Session/cookie. What else do we have? I feel like that's client side. Interesting that you. Let's talk about Ajax ever so briefly since you brought it up. And I would put this under like topic one, like how do servers work, right? How do servers work? Right? So AJAX requests, as we all know, are HTTP requests which have been launched from JavaScript as opposed to web forms or URL address bar or anchor tags, right? All of these four different things create HTTP requests. From the server's perspective, it essentially can't tell the difference between those four different types of requests, right? Now, there are some small subtle things, right? You could say, well, generally speaking, AJAX requests are much more likely to be requests for JSON data. They're much more likely to conform to a REST API. You can, in general, tell when it's going to be an AJAX request. Like, the server can, in some sense, tell that it's an AJAX request by using these heuristics, right? But these are not true in an absolute sense, right? It is absolutely possible for an AJAX request to simply request an index page. That is possible, right? So the server can't really tell the difference between different types of requests coming from different, facets of the browser. Does that make sense? Yeah. One further thing I would add to that, well, okay, since this is like the first topic of the course, we might as well start talking about the course here, right? Who always initiates client-server communication?
Client.
That's right. Always, 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 always. The server, like there are important consequences of that in server programming, like understanding how servers work. The server does not have the ability to establish a connection with a client. It cannot do it. This means that the server has no ability to push information to clients without the clients requesting it, right? So let's imagine that you're doing some kind of web application that needs to have information pushed to it every minute, right? Let's say let's say you've got like an Internet of Things thermometer or something, and you have an Internet of Things graph that's showing you how temperature is moving, right? You want that graph to stay updated, maybe every minute, maybe every 30 seconds, maybe every 10 seconds. You want a new dot on your graph, right? The server cannot push that information to the temperature graph application. Can't do it. Not possible. It's a server. It cannot establish a connection to a client. What has to happen is the client application must go check the server for new information, right? It sounds like it's somewhat easy to confuse, but this is like fundamentals of the internet, right? Your graphing application must make a request to the server and say, hey server, you got any updates for me? Hey server, you got any updates for me? Hey server, right? Meanwhile, the temperature probe is constantly sending its own packets to the server saying, hey server, I've got an updated temperature for you. Hey server, I've got an updated temperature for you, right? The server is just like, okay, I'm receiving the updated temperature, put it in my database. Receive the temperature, put it in my database. Then it's like, hey server, do you have an update for me? Oh, let me check my database. Yes, here you go. Boop, right? The server is only serving requests from clients. That's all it does. It cannot itself establish a connection with the client, with any client. Make sense?
So the the probe is also a client in this.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's a little strange to think of it that way, right? But this is kind of like goes into REST API stuff a little bit. Like everything that's not a server is a client. Right? And like your temperature probe is clearly not a server. Right? So yeah, basically this is kind of like these things would be communicating using REST API, right? Your temperature probe is sending data, so it's doing insert operations on the database, right? Your graph application is receiving data, it's doing select commands on the database. But in both cases, we're just making requests to a database that our, PHP apparatus, our MVC REST API, it's a middleware layer between the clients and the database, right? That's really the best way to think of servers is as middleware, right? Does that make sense?
So, sorry, you said a REST API is also a middleware?
Yeah. Well, the thing providing the REST API is the middleware, right? The API itself is basically a specification, right? It's like, if I receive this packet with this method, with these URL parameters, for me that means this function will fire and I will give you these outputs, right? We're trying to work with the server as if it were a black box, right? You guys familiar with the terminology black box versus white box? Yeah. Okay. You guys did the testing course then?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've always thought that a bit of a misnomer, actually, because it's like what they really mean is transparent and opaque, right? Like you can either see into the box or you can't. It's transparent or it's opaque. Neither blackness nor whiteness implies transparency or translucency. But the words are too long, I guess. So yeah, basically we want, like, the whole idea behind REST API is we want to deal with the server as if it's a black box. The purpose of the server fundamentally is to be middleware connecting people using the API to the database, right? It does a bit more than that, but that's the majority of it. It's like you've got that part and you've got views and that's it, right? Good. How else do servers work? So be aware of the steps involved in how PHP code gets executed. That's fundamental stuff that you should be aware of, right? When you receive a request for a PHP script, that whole file is loaded into the PHP interpreter. If we're not inside of a PHP tag, what mode are we in? HTML. So everything is being parsed and processed as regular HTML until we hit PHP. Then we do it programmatically. That tag is replaced with whatever is echoed from it, right? We continue, we parse out more PHP blocks. By the time the file is being queued for transmission to the client, there is no PHP left in it. All of the PHP is removed before it's sent out of the server. This is crucial for server security, right? Because, we all know about database connection code, right? We all have that as part of our PHP stuff. If a client could request your PHP source code, they would just be able to see sensitive information like, what is the password for the database? If they have the password for the database, they have your data, game over. Right? Do not pass go, do not collect $200. So, I make so if you've never played the board game Monopoly, that's a reference to the board game Monopoly. And it's interesting because that text appears on a card that sends you to jail. And it's like, these days, if you do something sufficiently stupid to cause a database breach where all of your customers lose all of their sensitive data, you might be going to jail, actually. You could at the very least get your pants sued off. You will get your pants sued off and often. Yes. So, database, server, client-server distinction. Yes, good. All right. So other topics that I will throw in here include what I might call PHP language topics. I would include file I/O, and I would include user input. Which is, user input is so fundamental. You've been doing it for basically every single thing we've been doing since we covered user input. But it would, of course, probably be useful to, review that as well. So, because, the actual steps necessary to properly use filter input, sometimes don't actually come out in the assignments. Yes?
Will hashing and password verify be important?
Ooh, that's a good one to throw on there. Passwords / hashing. Let's throw that on there too. Good idea. Yes.
How about any JSON to CSV conversion?
Well, that was actually I think that was a midterm question.
Yes.
On that midterm. I will include that under file I/O.
Okay.
File I/O / file formats. Yes?
Can we go over one-page applications?
One-page application. Sure, we can talk about that. I'm going to have to zip through these topics pretty quickly, unfortunately. Anything else? So let's continue from the beginning then. So PHP language topics then. The gist of this is that you should know in broad strokes, how does the type system work, for example? Like stuff about PHP as a language. What makes PHP different from the other languages that you've studied? How is it different from Java? How is it different from JavaScript, aside from the fact that you need a $sign in front of everything, which, although it's not trivial to type, is kind of a trivial difference, right? Okay, who can tell me what is PHP's type system? How does the type system work? I'm looking for two words.
It's weekly typed.
It's weakly typed and
Dynamic.
dynamically typed. Know the difference between weak and dynamic typing. What's the difference between weak and dynamic typing?
Weekly is like loose equality.
Yes. So weakly typed means that you've got two equality operators. You've got the regular one, and you've got strong equality, right? So this is closer to how equality works in Java, for example. This tests type and value. This tests just value. This works. This is actually the same as in JavaScript. That semantically works the same as in JavaScript. How about dynamic typing?
You don't need to declare types for variables. It does it automatically.
Yes. You don't need to declare types from variables. Another way of saying this is the type of the variable is inferred from what you assign to it, right? The other thing that dynamic typing allows you to do is to reassign types on the fly, right? So if I declare a variable, I assign it 5, and then I assign it the string hello afterwards. In Java, which is a statically typed language, not a dynamically typed language, this would be a compiler error. But in PHP, Java, or Python, PHP, JavaScript, or Python, all dynamically typed languages, this is fine. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Good. Aside from that, know things like what's the difference between single and double quotes in PHP. That's actually important in PHP in a way that it's not important in other languages, right? So single quotes are, this is literally the string, right? Do not interpret variables in this string. $sign just means $sign. If you use double quotes, then you want to interpret variables in the string. So anytime a variable occurs in a string with double quotes, it's replaced with the string converted value. Does that make sense? Aside from that, have some awareness of kind of the weird things that make PHP buggy and difficult to work with. Like, for example, how do Booleans convert to strings? Does anybody remember? Boolean true. How does that string convert in PHP? It's not what you expect.
Is it 0 or 1?
It's 1, right. So true in PHP converts to 1, right? So you would assume that false would become 0, right? Well, it doesn't. Did you guys know this? Do you know what it does? That's right, folks. False string converts to an empty string in PHP, which is the stupidest thing I've seen any language do ever in my life. With the possible exception of the way that Python handles private members, but so it goes. Stuff like that. Make sense? Yes.
Could we see an example of how that would be in a question?
Well,
Because an
I'll
empty string is
I-
not false or
I-
null.
I don't have time to invent the question, but I will describe for you the question. Normally, stuff in this category, I will give you a short piece of PHP code and ask you what its output is, right? And it will have some kind of language. I'll be testing a language rule in it, so it's like something will end up being a Boolean true or a Boolean false. Then I'll do string conversion on it and ask you what the output is. And if you say 1, full marks, right? Something like that. Another thing that you should be aware of in terms of PHP language topics is that troubling business that you had this week actually involving assignment statements. right? Assignment statements work a little bit strangely in PHP. You regularly see them inside of if statement conditions, unfortunately, right? You'll see something like if x is equal to 5, right? And you'll think, oh, that's a mistake. Java would not let me do that. And it's right, Java has every right to not let you do that. But this works anyways. X gets assigned 5. So you might be saying to yourself, if that's an assignment condition, then how do I evaluate the expression? Assignment statements in PHP have return results. The value assigned is the return result of assignment in PHP. So this gets evaluated to 5, if 5. Now, question, is 5 equivalent to true or false?
That's true.
It's true. Anything that's not 0 evaluates to true. Right? So, be aware of that kind of stuff as well. Question?
What if you put in x variable is equal to, like, just declare x variable inside the if statement? Would it just equal false? Because it has no value?
Oh, like, if x, like
Yeah.
that? Yeah, maybe. I'd have to try it.
Okay.
I'd have to try it. But I think you're right. You'd create the variable, I think, unless it doesn't in this case. If it creates the variable, its value would be default, which would be 0, so that would be false.
Okay.
Right? If that were undeclared, I think. I'd have to test it. Might be running up against another one of those weird edge cases, you know? But, you know, some of you may have seen, some of you may have seen example code where you'd have something like, if response is equal to, you know, like some kind of database call, right? Unfortunately, this is typical in PHP, right? PHP programmers do this sort of thing all the time. The other thing to be aware of is that it is actually important to know short circuit evaluation, which I think I need to keep moving on the topics, but write that down, short circuit evaluation, and look that up on your own time, please. So, language topics. User input. Basically, the acceptable way of doing it is using filter input. Be aware of the filters that you can use on filter input. Filter sanitize special characters. Don't use filter sanitize string, right? It's deprecated. Filter validate int, filter validate bool, filter validate float, filter validate, you know, all of that collection of them as well, right? But also understand what the output of filter input is. If it is a value, it is most likely the filtered or validated thing out that, you know, basically if you get a value out, validation passed, right? If you get a null out, what does that mean? If you get a null value out of filter input, it means that the variable wasn't set in the first place, right? That input that you're looking for was not sent from the client. It just is missing. right? If you get false, that normally means that validation failed, right? But don't ask me how they handle it with a Boolean validation filter, because one would think that validation failing, like they have to pick another value for it. It's so stupid. You should just use exceptions. So anytime you use filter input, it needs to be immediately followed by an if statement, checking for false and checking for null. And that in those if statements need to use strong equality comparison, because there are lots of things that weakly equate to 0 and false and null inside of PHP, right? 0, null, false, the empty string, which is actually a string containing the null character. I believe empty list will equate the same way as well. There might be a couple of others. All of these things equate to each other under weak equality. So if you don't use strong equality, you can't tell the difference between them. And you'll notice that 3 of them in this set are all possible valid outcomes of filter input validate integer. Right? Make sense? Sound good? Any questions? Good. So much for user input. So, file I/O then. I'll give you a free gift. All right? Handling file uploads is not on the exam, at least in terms of a coding question. All right?
Could you repeat that? Could you repeat that, sorry?
File uploads are not on the exam as a coding question. You may notice actually that it's the file, there's a file uploads question, which is a rejected question in the problem set. Basically, it was my observation. The reason I rejected that question is if you had had the foresight to copy the code segment in the module on file uploads onto your crib sheet, you would just get perfect on the question. There was nothing really distinguishing it from that. I think it even used the same variables. So yeah, it's good. It's good to review because it's I reserve the right to ask a question about it, in a theoretical question, not a code-based question, right? Like a short answer question, something like that. But file uploads, I won't ask you to code that on the exam. Okay? Sound fair? So essentially, in PHP, there are a couple of different ways to read a file, right? One way is to use fopen, freaderwrite, fclose, which is a very sort of C standard library approach. There are also ways of doing it, file get contents, file put contents. These two allow you to work with the file as a whole string, right? Rather than reading one line at a time out of it. Now, it strongly depends on the situation which one of those is more efficient. You might think that the one that does everything all at once would be more efficient, but not necessarily, right? If you're working with JSON data, in general, it makes sense to work with whole files, right? You don't want to have to write your own custom JSON parser. Just use JSON decode. That being said, if the data in the file is already semantically broken up by lines anyways, it actually can be less work to write an fopen, fread loop, fclose, right? Like if your file just consists of a bunch of numbers, each number on a new line, reading, if you wanted to use JSON, or if you wanted to use file get contents, you'd get your string, but then you'd have to just split on new lines, and then you'd have to feed it into the same loop anyways. It's less work to, read it as you're running the loop, right? So, just be aware that there's no magic hammer, right, that solves all problems. Every function you're given is a tool in your tool belt that works better on some situations and worse on others, including ones like file get content. Right? Make sense? All I'm trying to instill in you is that there are trade-offs, right? If you consider yourself to be a professional in this field, one of the things you require knowledge of is the trade-offs for various approaches to problems, right? And this is like in a third semester course, this should be like the direction your mind is now taking you, right? We've done the basics. Everybody should have a reasonably firm grounding in coding, right? You should be able to hack together pretty much any program, right? You should start to be thinking about, okay, but how do I do so more efficiently, right? Efficiency should be starting in your brain as something you should be thinking about, right? And of course, once you've gotten into fourth semester and you start doing data structures and algorithms, it's like, okay, yeah, now I do have to think about efficiency, right? So, good, file I/O. The other thing to be aware of is file. The two major file formats. I would say there's 2.5 major file formats, right? JSON is a major file format. You should know how to work with JSON. We have had lots of practice this semester, right? You should know how to work with CSV, comma separated value. That's less commonly used and quite easy to use. You just read it in line by line and explode on commas. Read it as an array, bing, bang, boom. Throw away the header row if it has one. Text files, I kind of consider to be that's the half in 2.5 file formats, because a text file is literally just a string, right? You read it, you do string stuff with it, you put it back, whatever, right? So, any questions about file I/O? Okay, that's not a hand.
No.
Okay, all right. So, just because it's kind of, in that territory, let's now quickly talk about one-page applications. So, the idea behind a one-page application is that all of your HTML and PHP code are integrated into one file, right? So this is kind of the main takeaway from it is that you can do things iteratively write a data structure into HTML without using echo statements by kind of popping back into HTML mode, right? This, like the tools and techniques that we explored when we talked about one-page applications, these become our toolbox when we're making views for MVC architecture, right? The main difference is we'll be pulling our data from a template array primarily, right? So, yeah, I guess there's like one technical thing. Be aware of this syntax, right? You probably have seen this before. This is a contraction for the following. That's it. Just don't let that confuse you, right? One interesting note about PHP, the semicolon is actually optional in the last line of any PHP block. That's, you know, not practical knowledge, but you know, if anybody puts their hand up during the exam and says, I think you forgot a semicolon on this line, if that's the situation, I reserve the right to say, no, I didn't. But the semicolon is missing. That's right. But it's not a mistake. Right? Okay. Anyway, so basically the idea of behind a one-page app is all of the code is in one file and you're mixing HTML and PHP together. Right? One-page apps have their place, but if you want to do any serious work, you shouldn't have all of your code in one file, right? If you want to do any serious work, I would recommend, well, is this running? Yes. If you want to do any serious work, I wouldn't recommend doing it in vanilla PHP anyways, right? But if you want to do serious work in PHP, you should be using Laravel, right? Which is the PHP framework that's taught in Advanced PHP, which is a course that we have on offer here at the college, right? If you want to do any serious work, you should do it in MVC architecture, not really in a one-page app, right? The one-page app might suffice for, like, you know, the web page home. Basically, if it's like a web page that you would be inclined to call a home page, then you probably one-page app is fine, right? Like, for example, if you have a historical reenactment society who does a historical reenactment in like Battlefield Park every year, their website is probably fine. Probably fine to do a one-page app. But if you want to do anything more complicated than that, you know, think about an MVC architecture. But by the way, websites like that one that I mentioned are fantastic, like little jobs that if you've got some connections, you can get a job designing a web page, put that on your resume, and use that as a stepping stone into a career as a web developer, right? So I've seen a few students take this route, basically. If you, like, a thing that you should probably be working on as you guys are currently college students is, like, you know, work experience, right? And it's like, okay, yeah, sure, that's what co-op is for ostensibly. But, you know, it is possible that, you know, I hate to say networking, but networking, you know, like each one of you has hopefully some degree of friends, family, acquaintances, you know. No, you're completely alone in the world. Yeah, that's unfortunate. No, like, like mentor figures or father figures? No,
Well,
no.
different and like different like nothing with tech. Like
Yeah. Well, see, but the interesting thing is like being able to design a web page for someone is actually something you don't need someone in the tech industry to to supply you with a project. In fact, probably you don't want someone in the tech industry to give you this project because they'll have high standards for your work, right? What you want is like, oh, grandma has a cookie business. She wants a website, right? That's the level that you want to get into the industry at. Find some person who's tech illiterate, who you know or have some contact with. They're like, oh, it would be great if I had something on the internet. I hear it's important to have something on the internet these days. It's like, Grandma, are you trying to do your business with a Facebook post? Come on, Grandma, you need a website. It's like, oh, you think I need a website? Oh, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. I'll give you $10. And you take the $10 and you make the website for your grandma's cookie business, and because that goes on your resume. I know it's working for exposure, and you shouldn't work for exposure if you can help it. But if you've got no other choice, make grandma's cookie website. All right? That's a good first step. You can use that you can use it if you do a good job on grandma's cookie website. It's got to be the best cookie website on the internet, all right? It's got to be impressive to prospective employers, right? But like, if you're a web developer, a GitHub repo isn't your portfolio. Web pages on the internet is your portfolio. Your portfolio page should link to the websites that you've built for people. And if they're all grandma's cookie website, it's something, right? People can look at your work, they can see that you're serious and that you're trying to get into the industry, right? So that's my recommendation. Go talk to your grandmothers, go talk to your grandfathers, see if they'll put you up for making a website for them, right? Because it doesn't really matter how many people you know. At least one of them has a crazy business idea, right? So there's some career advice in the middle of our review session, apropos of nothing. But it's important that the website look nice. But the advantage of something like Grandma's Cookie website is that it probably doesn't require a database backend, right? She probably doesn't need you to do online ordering systems. Although that's also a very useful thing to figure out how to do, right? She probably doesn't need online ordering. She probably just wants oh, here's the list of products, and here you call this phone number, and you send me a fax, and I send you cookies, right? I guess my advice is start small. Start small and build your career up, right? Start as small as possible. Yes.
So, will that work for co-op jobs?
Well, so for a co-op job, there are some specific requirements. It has to be you have to be you have to be a proper employee, first of all, right? Which grandma's probably not going to want to fill out tax documents on you, right? Second of all, there's a requirement for how many hours the position has to give you for it to count as a co-op. So this is this particular recommendation is more this is my recommendation for how you spend your Saturday when you're not studying for my exam, right? You should be able to whip something up reasonably quickly, given what you know in the program so far, right? Just make sure that you're not writing the content of the paragraphs. You are the web designer, and make sure you communicate with your customer to see what web page should actually have in it. A really good gig is taking someone's old 90s ass website and making it modern looking. That's great because then you already have the content basically. Question?
If I'm to pioneer something on my own tomorrow, would just throwing something on XAMPP and running my computer 24/7 work, or do I need like a bigger, proper setup that's probably third party or something?
Oh, that's a good question. So for your own development work, running it on XAMPP, like XAMPP can't connect to the internet, right? So there really should be something in this course on deployment, and there isn't, unfortunately. That's one of the things, I'm planning for the future for this course, is we should have some actual, like, uploading to CS Unix isn't really deployment anymore, right? Most things are deployed to the cloud. So if you want my advice for deployment, you'll need to learn some things, but this is what you should learn, right? Number one, learn how to containerize an Apache server, right? Get Docker, learn how to containerize it. Sign up for some cloud service that has fairly generous free limits, like the limit for free is pretty high on it. I think Google Cloud has a pretty decent introductory free tier. You can certainly get up and running with that. It's to some extent, it's supposed to be a little bit student friendly. I think the Google one. I wouldn't try AWS unless you have some money to spend. This is what I hear. And in theory, all of you as students have $100 in MS Azure credits while you're students. But when I talk to other professors, they say, well, you do have $100 in credits, but you run through them pretty quickly. So so I would find one with decent free tier. Google Firebase, I've heard people have had success with as well. Firebase is a little weird though because it makes you use their database technology, which you may not want to use. Google, I'm pretty sure you can just ship them a container and you can have a server, right? But yeah, so write your PHP application, containerize it, send it to a cloud service. These are all very important. These are not easy tasks to figure out if you don't already know how to do it. But once you've done that, then you can put anything you want on the internet, and you are a web developer, right? So that's my recommendation. The beautiful thing about containers is you don't have to learn Node, right? You can make a container with an Apache server using this very PHP, right? Which might sound appealing. Learning Node is an excellent use of your time as well, but one thing at a time, right? Yeah. That would be my recommendation. It is in theory still possible to talk to companies that will rent you server space on Apache servers. This is still possible, right? Basically how that works is you register a domain name, which I think you probably have to do with the cloud as well, but you register a domain name, costs you something like $20 for a year, right? Then you talk to you talk to a company or a person who has a server, and you say, here's the information for my domain, can you give me an account please? And then they give you account login information, pretty much the same way as CS Unix works actually. And you just log into the Apache server using SSH, PuTTY, WinSCP, upload your files to the server, and it's on the internet at the specified domain in the way that we do in class, right? That technology still exists, right? You can still do that, but it's kind of outmoded and maybe more expensive than you were hoping it would be, right? Because, basically, if you're on Google Cloud, for instance, if you start pushing their free limits, then you should think about how your website's going to make money, right? Because if you start pushing their limits, then you should have acquired like some users, right? Like a website with no users is going to be pretty cheap to run on the cloud because you're charged for usage, right? So anyway, that's what I have to say about all of that. Again, cloud deployment is absolutely something that I'm planning for future releases of this course, but unfortunately we're still stuck in PHP land. So, okay. Continuing review. I'm going to consider one-page app to be talked about. Let's talk about sessions and cookies. So, it's important to know how a cookie works, what a cookie is, how are they transmitted, right? So, a cookie is a key value pair. It looks quite a lot like a get parameter. Cookies are tied to website domains, and anytime a browser sends a request to a domain, it collects up all of the cookies that apply to that domain, and it sends them automatically. Cookies do not need to be specifically requested. They are always sent by default, right? Which makes sense. The server has no ability to request cookies. The server can't request anything. It's a server, not a client. You see how client-server distinction comes into every single thing? Every single thing, every single time. So, you can set cookies manually, but generally speaking, it's a bad idea to store plain text in cookies for security reasons. If you actually look at cookies that exist in the wild, most of the time you will find they are cryptographically secure strings. They look like passkeys, right? The reason for this is, I'll spare you the agony of me going into the cryptography stuff, right? But the reason is cryptographically secure strings are inherently unguessable, right? And a lot of them end up corresponding to things like session IDs, right? So, a session in PHP is an associative array stored in a database within the web server, right? Now, this is an important distinction. You have SQL servers, you have Apache web servers. Those are two different server processes, right? The session database, instead of doing it with my hands, why don't I use the board, eh? So, if this is CS Unix, right? You have Apache, the Apache web server. You also have the SQL database server. The session database is in here. Right? It's not any part of the SQL database. The SQL database, the purpose of it is deep data storage. Deep and long-term data storage. Sessions are temporary data storage. So basically how it works, when a session is established, the server gives a cookie with a unique ID number to a client. When a request packet comes to the server and it has a cookie, and that cookie's ID number matches something in the session database, it opens up that session. This again comes back to the fact that servers cannot distinguish what client sent what packet. It can't tell the difference between different clients, not without this mechanism. And this is why session cookie theft is a big problem. If an attacker gets your session ID, they have a duplicated, it's not even that they have a duplicated session. They are also sending packets into the same session that you are, right? 2 terminals, 1 session, right? Which is a problem for, all kinds of security related reasons. So sessions are maintained by cookies. This means that if you delete or damage a cookie, you break the session as well, right? Cookies have expiries. Well, at least it's good practice to set a cookie with an expiry. Sessions also, therefore, expire. Does that make sense? Once you understand that theoretical stuff about sessions, they're actually quite easy to work with. You use the session start function command at the top of your PHP script. This creates the session superglobal. The session superglobal is an associative array. It's a lot like the get superglobal array, except you're supposed to write into it as well as read from it, right? You can write data into it, and then the next time a client connects and the server says, oh, this is this session, it reopens all of the previous data from a previous iteration. So, similarly to how on page reload all JavaScript information is wiped out, right? In the same way, in PHP, when the PHP script finishes, all of the data that it has stored is wiped out unless it's been written into the file system, into the database, or into the session, right? So the session is intended to store data between executions of the PHP script in a way that's controlled and organized and specific to the user. File I/O is a way of doing this for all users. Sessions are a way of doing this for each specific user. Does that make sense? Any questions about sessions? What's the problem with session destroy?
To end the session?
Yes, but why are we not supposed to use it?
It resets it?
It removes the session.
It
clears all data from it and deletes the session.
Yes, it clears all data from it and deletes the session. And if you read the PHP documentation, they don't recommend you use session destroy. What do you know what they recommend using instead?
Session unset.
Session unset, that's right. So session unset removes the data, but leaves the session intact, right? So if it's good enough for the PHP documentation to say, please don't use this function unless you know what you're doing, you should follow its advice, right? Anytime the documentation for anything says, don't do this unless you have a good reason, don't do it unless you have a good reason. Yes?
So for a logout,
Mhm.
we're just supposed to do session unset?
Yes. So that actually kind of comes into our next topic, which is passwords. So we know sessions. Let's talk about session validation. So it is a common misconception that logging in creates the session, right? It's like, if password verify session start, right? You can do it this way, but very often, what you do is you establish the session as soon as the user visits the website, before they've been validated, and when they perform a successful login, you set something in the session that says this person is logged in, right? You elevate the privileges of an existing session rather than creating one specifically for the login, right? So, this has a few advantages. I would say it has a security advantage because without this, anytime there is a session cookie, it's worth stealing, right? But without that, like if login is only validating existing sessions, then probably a great number of the sessions that are in existence are not validated and therefore not worth stealing, right? So you're kind of doing the shell game thing. You had a question?
Yes, what is the difference between the session start function and the session dot auto start?
Session dot what?
So session dot auto underscore start?
Session dot PHP auto start?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay, so session dot auto start is not a command for a PHP script. It is a option that you set in PHP.ini, the initializer file. So it's an option you can set for your Apache server to automatically start sessions, right? So that's number one. That's the difference, right? You don't need to call session start if auto start is enabled. There are advantages and disadvantages. First, it kind of like, it also depends on like how classic is this Apache server, right? How many users are using this Apache server? Like, if you're doing cloud deployment of an Apache container, you basically have control, like you have root access to the server, you have control over all of its configuration, right? If you're renting space on a server, or it puts you in basically the same position that you are here with respect to CS Unix, right? You have an account on a server. You don't get to set options like that, right? It would be actually probably a pretty big deal to go to someone you're renting server space from and saying, hey, could you modify php.ini because it modifies it for everybody, right? Which might include hundreds of people, who knows, right? So you're like reaching out to hundreds of other companies or whatever and saying, I say it's like this. And they might be like, no, right? You just introduced a bunch of PHP warnings into our websites because session start would probably give a warning if the session is already started. I believe that's the case. So, yeah, auto start. If you're working on your own Apache container, go for it. But if you might not be able to use it, right? Depends on the circumstances.
The same applies with the upload underscore progress.
Yeah, pretty much, like literally anything in that file, this discussion applies to it. Like even stuff like, max file upload size. Presumably file uploads would be permitted on the server, although, you should be careful about that if you're renting server space because you'll be charged for storage. You'll be charged for storage anywhere, right? But be careful with it. Yeah, generally like php.ini is a file that you the networking stream teaches courses on this. You get me? You are a software developer. Now, as cloud stuff progresses, these two aspects are sort of, the Venn diagram, the overlap in the middle is becoming more overlappy, right? To do cloud deployment of a server container, you have to configure the server, right? Which means that you're going to be doing a certain amount of server administration, a thing that the networking people are taught explicitly and you're not, right? It's still very worthwhile stuff to know, particularly as things move in this direction. But in the classic sense, that might not be your job. You should consider carefully whether that's your job before you engage in it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Very good. These are lots of good questions, I have to say. Yes?
Will we be doing, will we be making our own PO objects for the tests?
Oh, yeah. So you've got we're kind of we've got 20 minutes left, eh? So I think for the remainder of class, questions about the exam. You have a crib sheet available. Put the connection code on it. Fair enough?
Yep.
So basically, the reason, the test has been designed with the fact that you have a crib sheet in mind. I've written the test with the assumption that you guys are going to pick through the notes for any important chunks of code and put them on your crib sheet. That's an important chunk of code. Fair enough?
Yep.
Good. That being said, I reserve the right to, I can't actually remember if, I made the exam for this course 2 weeks ago. I can't remember what's on the exam. I can't remember if I'm actually requiring you to put the PDO connection code on or not.
Okay.
It'd still be good to have.
Yeah.
Be cautious. Good. I think we've basically talked about sessions and cookies then. So I will speak very briefly about passwords and hashing. Know how to use the hashing function, password hash. Know that you have to use password verify in order to verify the password, right? Be aware that hashing is not two-way encryption, it's one-way encryption, and that you can't unhash something, right? That's kind of how the whole thing, that's what makes it work, right? So for the SQL database, this will hopefully, I think pretty much everybody's done the database course, is that correct? Most of you should have anyways. So I will be, hopefully everybody knows SQL, right? You will be required to do a bit of SQL, right? Not too much SQL. Have the PDO connection code written down. Be familiar with the statement prepare, statement execute thing. Anybody who leaves their code vulnerable to SQL injection attack doesn't just get 0 in that question, but the whole course. I'm kidding, of course. But know how to use the PDO properly to prevent SQL injection attacks. That's that's pretty important. Substantial point deductions are available for people who leave their code vulnerable to SQL injection attack, let's just say. Fortunately, the PDO makes it easy to avoid them. So know how to use the PDO properly. Know how to retrieve information from the PDO from a select query. Know how to determine whether it succeeded or failed. Right? Make sense?
Yep.
We have done that code 11 gazillion times in class. But it bears often repeating. Before I close that topic off, also be aware of this distinction, right? Be aware that this is a server process. It might be on the same computer, it might be on the same physical hardware as the web server, it might not. And if it is, then these things are local host with respect to each other. So from the perspective of a PHP script, if the SQL server is on the same machine, you access it through localhost. I think this is something that some people have been having a little bit of difficulty with the final assignment, getting their code connected, because people have been replacing localhost as the host name with csunix.mohawk.college.ca, and it's you're already on CS Unix once that code is there, right? It's like you're telling CS Unix, hey, go find CS Unix, right? No, you don't. It's localhost, right? So for the assignment, there you go. Also, make sure that you update the login information and the database's name. That also has to be correct, right? That's likely going to be different from your local XAMPP SQL database that you've been working with, right? Cool. So going from XAMPP to CS Unix, actually the database, the host name does not change. It is still localhost, but the database name likely needs to change and your login credentials will need to change. Those 3 things. Okay? Makes it easy if you make them variables. Good. All right. MVC and REST APIs then. So be aware of MVC from a theoretical standpoint, right? Know what is meant by M, V, and C, model, view, and controller. Understand what their jobs are, right? What's the job of the controller?
I'm working right now.
Control the script.
Yeah, the controller for MVC. What does the controller do?
Controls the script.
It controls the script, yes, but how?
It's the point of entry for the client, for client requests, and also what sends out the response to the clients.
Very good. So any communication outside the server goes through the controller, right? Good. It's also responsible for selecting the right functions in the model and selecting the right views, right? It also sets up the template array as a way to communicate information from the model to the view, right? The template array communicates information from the model to the view. The view builds the view, which the controller then sends out to the client, right? We kind of talked about it a little bit when we said we were talking about one-page apps, right? The views in MVC are built in a very kind of one-page apps kind of feel. You know, you're mixing. They're going to be mostly HTML code with some PHP snippets thrown in, right? The model is probably the easiest of the three because all you're doing is you're taking, your database queries, mostly database queries, and putting them in functions, right? If you want to be extra fancy about it, you can put them in classes, and that's how Laravel does it. But for our purposes here at this point, functions is fine for our purposes, right? So functions are fine for our purposes. So model functions will most of the time be database operations, right, to the SQL database. But this is kind of because of where the MVC material lies in the course itself. The model is also responsible for communicating information to the session, right? So any reading from or writing to the session, it's okay to read from the session elsewhere, but certainly if you're writing to the session, or God forbid, doing session unset or something like that, those should be model functions, right? The guts of a logout is session unset, but that should be called from a logout function in the model, right? It's okay to have a model function that's very short. What it's giving you is the option to expand it with more stuff later, right? Architecture. And besides, as we all know from Java, the smaller a function or method is, the easier it is to work with, right? So small functions, good. Lots of small functions, better, right? So good. Everybody is aware of all of that, hopefully. Remember that you have to include the model in your controller, otherwise you don't have your model functions, right? There's some nuts and boltsy stuff as well with MVC. Remember to include your model. Remember that you use include statements to load views at the bottom. Remember that you have to declare the template array. Remember in model functions that you have to declare global variables global before they're used. That will most often include the connection, right? The PDO itself, and the template array. Those two things will most likely, the first line of any model function you write should be global TPL PDO. Right? Make sense? Because otherwise they're out of scope. Yes. REST API, there are a couple of, so I view REST API as being layered on top of MVC. Basically, if you take the V in MVC and make it optionally give you JSON instead of HTML, you've got a REST API, right? Does that make sense? So, because with our MVC examples in class, we're still fundamentally issuing web pages. But with a REST API, you are often just wanting data out of it, right? Not whole web pages. So there are a couple of important elements. Number one, using the htaccess file to restrict access to files other than the file you intend, right? This is necessary on PHP servers, but like a node server just does this by default, right? So htaccess, you have to restrict access to the control file, right? Number two, be aware of request methods having semantics now. It used to be before, and the difference between get and post, you should review that as well, right? But it used to be that we thought about get and post parameters in like taking advantage of their mechanics, right? The get parameter, that's in the URL, you can share links with it, but don't send anything secure. Post, the parameters go in the encrypted payload, so you can send secure things by post, but you can't link to things with it, right? That distinction, that was our understanding of get versus post. But with REST APIs, we layer basically a mapping between request methods and CRUD operations, right? So a GET request is asking the server to get you something. It maps to a select query. These are not hard rules, right? These are not hard rules, but this is like the general feel of it, right? Post, you're posting something. That will most often be an insert operation. Delete is delete, self-explanatory. Put is update. That's kind of like a little stranger, but put is update, just remember it. Make sense? URL parameters are a big one. Put something on your cheat sheet about how to read URL parameters. Maybe even a piece of code on how to effectively split those apart to get the individual parameters out. Understand that in REST APIs, the API itself often takes the form of a table, right? You'll have something like method, URL, or URI, parameters, and then like a description. And understand that like get get user ID is very different from delete user ID, right? Very different operations. You can't tell the difference between these operations by looking only at the URL parameters, right? The URL parameters are the same in both cases. By the way, if you see a colon, that means that this is a variable you're meant to read. If there's no colon, it means this is a string that you're meant to match, right? So this, for you to run this function, right, user must be present, and then you have an ID, right? Something that occurs before the end of this or the next slash or something like that, right? That is read and that becomes input, right? Input to the model function. But you need to select which model function you're going to do based on the method. So know how to read the request method, know how to read the URL, know how to write a few if statements and maybe a switch statement to select between these operations. Does this make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Good. So basically the essence of creating an MVC controller, reading a table like this, selecting, like being able to call the right model function at the right time, and then also selecting the view which is appropriate for whatever the model function did. So basically, you've got two blocks of if statements, or switch statements, right? The first block selects the model function, the second block selects the view. The template array is where the data gets stored to pass data from one to the other. Does that make sense? Are there any questions?
So that is about URL parameters, right? That table.
It's about URL parameters, request methods as well. There will also be a description that should make it obvious what model function you should be calling, right? So like, get user or remove user, right? It should, like, you might have to parse a little bit of English, but if you read the description, you should be able to decide which model function matches each of these cases. Does that make sense? Class is officially over, but if anybody has any quick follow-up questions, I'd be happy to answer them before we break.
Oh, I want to show you my assignment.
Oh,
Do you have that?
yes, but once we're, yeah. Any questions?
So are there any more like types of methods you can discern using URL parameters? Because you have only get and delete listed. Like, for example, like post or like session. Can you determine using any of those?
The four that you should worry about are get, post, delete, and put. There are more request methods than this, but for our purposes in this course, that is our subset. And like, honestly, this will get you pretty far in industry too.
Okay.
There are a few more exotic ones, but this isn't a comprehensive list, but that's, yeah. Know what these will do. Ouch. Any other questions? All right. Well, if there are no further questions, I wish you all the best luck, not only on this exam, but any other exams you may be writing this semester. Hope to see you in the fall in a different course. Well, first I hope to see all of you at the exam. Please come to the exam.